The shadow that covered Europe. Imagine the sky over London, a cold autumn night in the year 1940. Sirens are wailing their soul-chilling song. The flashes of anti-aircraft guns tear through the velvety darkness, and in these sudden flares, swift, ghostly silhouettes are momentarily visible. They don't look like clumsy bombers. They look like sharks. Long, narrow fuselages, twin-tail fins, a distinctive cockpit nose. They don't just fly, they glide through the night, as if ignoring the laws of physics. These are not just airplanes. These are Junkers WWIIs. It wasn't the fastest. It didn't have armor like a tank. It didn't shine with chrome and the latest technology, like some prototype. But it became, without exaggeration, the most dangerous aircraft of the Second World War. Why? Because it was everywhere. It bombed your cities by day and by night. It sank your ships in the Atlantic and the Arctic. It hunted and killed your bombers in the pitch black. It spied on you thousands of kilometers behind the front lines. The WWII is not a story about a brilliant breakthrough. It is a story of fanatical, almost insane pragmatism. It is the designer's answer to the question, can you make everything from one piece of metal? An answer that spawned 15,000 machines in 60 modifications. This is the story of how an elegant idea was violated by military doctrine, survived, mutated, and became a nightmare for half the world. This is the story of the workhorse of the apocalypse. Ready to dive into the maelstrom of intrigue, engineering dramas, and military crimes? Then let's go. Put everything aside, you're in for a long, but insanely interesting read. The birth of an idea. The Schnellbomber, the unfulfilled dream. Economic and political context, Germany in the mid-30s. To understand the WWII, you have to transport yourself to Germany in the year 1935. Hitler had been in power for 2 years. The Treaty of Versailles was a pitiful piece of paper, publicly torn apart in front of the whole world. The Luftwaffe, revived by the genius and ambition of Hermann Göring, were eagerly searching for aircraft that would prove the power of the Third Reich to the world. But what were they supposed to be like? The country was on the rise, but its resources were not limitless. Gold and currency reserves were meager. Raw materials were in short supply. Every Reichsmark counted. It was under these conditions that not just an airplane was born, but a philosophy, universalism. The Germans could not afford to build a separate fleet of heavy bombers, a separate fleet of dive bombers, and a separate fleet of reconnaissance aircraft. They needed one platform, one base, like a Swiss Army knife, but on the scale of military aviation. The idea was brilliantly simple: to create a high-speed bomber. The Germans called it a Schnellbomber that would not need fighter escorts. Its own speed was to be its shield. Imagine a bomber flying at 500 kilometers per hour, while your fighters could barely reach 450. Catch it? Almost impossible. Shoot it down? Even harder. The prototype, which first flew in 1936, was the embodiment of this dream. Elegant, swift, with 2 Jumo engines, it showed the coveted 500 kilometers per hour in tests. Designers William Heinrich and Ernst Zindel created not just an airplane, they created a symbol of a new, lightning war blitzkrieg in the air. It was supposed to carry up to 1.5 tons of bombs and run away from any interceptor. It would have been the perfect tool for precise, devastating strikes on airfields, bridges, and columns of equipment. My opinion, this is the point where history takes a sharp turn. And this is, perhaps, the key moment in the entire WWII saga. If the Germans had gone down this path, the history of the Second World War in the air might have been different. The Schnellbomber could have become for the Luftwaffe what the Mosquito later became for the British: an elusive, omnipresent, and demoralizing weapon. But fate had other plans. The doctrine of a blind man. How it broke the dream. The Spanish lesson and the hypnosis of diving. While the Junkers engineers were celebrating the success of the prototype, a different man with his own obsession reigned in the high offices of the Air Ministry. General Ernst Udet, the hero of the First World War, a charismatic flying ace, a fanatic of dive bombing. He had just returned from Spain, where he had witnessed the stunning success of the WWII Stuka. The Stuka, with its wail of the Jericho trumpet and jeweler's precision of strikes, had a hypnotic effect on Udit. He saw dive bombing as the absolute weapon, and he, possessing enormous influence, imposed this doctrine on the entire Luftwaffe. The fatal order was born in his head, turned the promising high-speed bomber WWII into a dive bomber. Allow me to reflect a bit here. Imagine a dialogue that probably never happened but perfectly captures the essence of the tragedy. Junker's engineer almost pleading, "Herr Udit, it's a sprinter. We honed it for speed. If we start reworking it for diving, we will kill its main advantage. It will become heavier, slower." Udit with a fanatical gleam in his eye. "Precision, Herr Engineer. Precision. Your sprinter will miss, and my dive bomber will put a bomb right down the coal bunker hatch. Rework it." This was the moment when sound calculation fell victim to doctrinal stubbornness. The Germans, these pragmatists to the core, suddenly committed a completely impractical act. They tried to force a sprinter long-distance runner to enter the ring with a weightlifter. The cost of compromise, violence against the airframe. And so it began. The designers had to literally rewrite the machine, breaking its original essence. Airframe. To withstand the monstrous G-forces when pulling out of a dive up to 6 to 7 G, the fuselage and wings had to be strengthened several times over. More frames were added, spars were reinforced. The weight began to creep up. Air brakes. To prevent the heavy machine from accelerating to excessive speeds in a dive from which recovery would be impossible, perforated lattice brakes were built into the wings. They looked like small fences that extended perpendicular to the airflow. Effective, but murderous for aerodynamics. Cockpit. For the bombardier's view when aiming in a dive, the nose section was radically redesigned. It was made almost completely transparent, from flat panels. This greenhouse provided excellent visibility but was fragile and created additional drag. Armament and load. Defensive machine gun positions were added, initially weak MG-15s, and the bomb load was increased to 3 tons. The result? The elegant Schnellbomber with its 500 km/h turned into the WWII-A1, which in series production barely managed 460. A loss of 40 km/h is not just a number. It is the loss of the concept. The loss of that very shield for which it was all started. Economic background. The cost of the mistake. It is difficult to find exact figures for the costs of redesign, but let's use logic. Thousands of man-hours of work by the best engineers, reworking production lines, delaying serial production by almost a year and a half. In the conditions of a looming war, time is the most valuable resource. The Germans spent it on making a good airplane. Worse, if these resources had been directed toward refining the original concept or developing heavy bomber aviation, for example, the Hiat 177, the balance of power in the Battle of Britain might have been different. The phoenix from the ashes. The birth of the universal soldier. But here's the paradox. From this violence against the dream, something new was born. The ugly, from the point of view of the purity of the idea, compromise gave rise to an incredible survivability. The WWII did not become the perfect dive bomber the Stuka reigned there. It did not become the perfect high-speed bomber. The dream was dead. But it became a compromise that was needed on every front. It turned into the Lego set of the Third Reich. Let's go through the roles of this universal actor. 1. Bomber WWII-A, the workhorse of the Luftwaffe. This is its main incarnation. From Poland to Stalingrad, from Norway to North Africa, it carried up to 3 tons of bombs. It could bomb from level flight and from a dive. It was hardy. 2 engines, a robust airframe. It often returned to base with 1 working engine and shot up wings. Its losses, especially compared to the Heinkel 111, were lower. It was loved by the crews. It had logic, predictability. 2. Night Fighter WWII-CG, the Phantom of the Dark Sky. This is perhaps the most grim and effective role of the WWII. When daytime raids on Germany became too costly for the Luftwaffe, the Allies switched to night bombing. And here the WWII found its second wind. See modification. In the nose, instead of the glass cockpit, a solid metal nose with a battery of cannons and machine guns was installed. Often 2 or 3 MG at 151 20mm cannons and a pair of MG at 17 machine guns. This was a flying bandit that crept up on a Lancaster or Halifax from below and to the side and pumped explosive shells into it at close range. G modification, the apotheosis. To the already deadly armament, radars were added. First the FIGA 212, then the more advanced FIGA 220 Liechtenstein with its characteristic antler antennas. The crew of a night fighter now consisted not only of a pilot, but also of a radar operator who guided him onto the target in pitch darkness. For British bomber squadrons, these machines became the embodiment of a nightmare. The best German night aces, like Helmut Lent 110 victories or Werner Strybe 66 victories, shot down most of their victims precisely on the WWII. My opinion and analysis: the effectiveness of the WWII as a night fighter is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it is a triumph of the platform's adaptability. On the other, it is a sign of desperation. The Germans failed to create a specialized, purpose-built night fighter as effective as the British Mosquito. They patched the holes again and again with their Swiss Army knife. And it held on, but by the end of the war, they were being intercepted themselves. 3. Reconnaissance WWII. The eye of the Kriegsmarine and Abwehr. Remove the bombs. Install additional fuel tanks in the bomb bay and under the wings. Mount the most modern cameras. You get an aircraft capable of flying thousands of kilometers. It was these machines, taking off from Norway or France, that went far out into the Atlantic, trying to spot the infamous PQ convoys heading to Murmansk. They conducted reconnaissance over North Africa, over the territory of the USSR. They were difficult to intercept, they were fast and high-flying. 4. Torpedo bomber WWII for Torp, a 17. The ship hunter. Another facet of versatility. 2 LTF-5 aerial torpedoes could be slung under the fuselage. And with the FIGA 200 Hohenwheel radar, such an aircraft turned into an all-weather hunter for ships in the Arctic and Mediterranean. It was a constant headache for the Allied fleets. 5. Tank destroyer WWII. A mad experiment. And this was the realm of madness. The Germans tried to turn the WWII into a flying anti-tank gun. A huge fairing under the fuselage housed a 75mm gun Pak 40, or even a 50mm one. Imagine, you approach a tank and fire a shell the size of a loaf of bread into it. Theoretically deadly, practically monstrous. The recoil when fired was such that the airplane literally stopped in mid-air. Accuracy was low, and vulnerability was extreme. These modifications remained a curiosity, but they perfectly demonstrate the principle. Let's try this too. The phenomenon of survivability. Why did it last so long? Economic analysis. War of attrition. By 1944, Germany was fighting a war of attrition. A shortage of everything: aluminum, fuel, skilled workers, pilots. Specialized, complex aircraft like the Mi 110 or He 177 were capricious, demanding in production and maintenance. But the WWII was different. Its genius lay in its repairability and manufacturability. Construction. It was designed to be assembled and repaired at hundreds of airfields scattered across Europe by not so highly qualified technicians. Engines were changed quickly. Damaged wing or fuselage sections could be replaced as whole units. Weaponry modernization. The MG-15 machine guns were calmly replaced with faster-firing twin MG-81s and later with large-caliber MG-131s. The design allowed for this without major alterations. Electronics. The platform swallowed any new electronics. Radars, Flensburg jamming systems, navigation systems. It was like a computer with lots of free expansion slots. While newer and more advanced aircraft were struggling with teething troubles, the WWII was already flying and fighting. It was that old reliable servant you could count on. My final reflection: genius or mistake? So what was the Junkers WWII? The best universal aircraft or the main mistake of Gring and Udit? I believe it was both. This is dialectics. The mistake was at the very beginning. The forced transformation of a perfect tool for one war into a compromise for another cost Germany time, resources, and, possibly, tactical advantages in the critical period of 1940 to 1941. But the genius manifested later in this machine's ability, despite the initial distortion of its essence, to become the most important aircraft of the Luftwaffe. It wasn't the best at any one thing, but it was the second best at almost everything. And in the conditions of total war, when holes need to be plugged on all fronts, the second best universal turned out to be more valuable than the first best specialist. The WWII is a symbol of the German war machine, effective, pragmatic, ruthless, but ultimately deadlocked due to initial strategic errors. It was the platform that carried the entire air war for the Luftwaffe on its wings, from the first to the last day. It was both a hammer and a sickle, and a scalpel, and a shield. It was the main universal soldier who fought to the end, even when its empire collapsed in fire and ash. So, that's the story. Friends, this was a titanic job. If you've read this far, you are true heroes. Please write in the comments what you think. Am I right in my conclusions? Is the WWII still a work of engineering genius or a product of fatal mistakes? Your opinion will help us make even cooler content. And of course, subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed it. There are many more such deep dives ahead. Thank you for staying with us.